So you're ready to start planning out your online course. And hopefully by this time, you may or may not have a list of course ideas. Okay. And I recommend maybe even taking a day to brainstorm all of the different ideas for courses that you may or may not have. Well, let's say you have narrowed it down to one course and you're not entirely sure how to go about planning the content for that course. And I would recommend maybe sticking to one type of process for each online course that you're planning on offering. But before you really sit down to plan, I want to just highlight some really important points for you as you are going through this process of planning out your course. These are tips and things to keep in mind while you are in the process of planning. So the first one, I actually was thinking about the movie Little Women, and I don't know if you've seen it, but the professor tells Jo that she needs to write what she knows. And so my very first tip is to teach what you know. And this is, I think, a little bit self-explanatory, but sometimes I think we try to be more grandiose in what we're putting out into the world in the form of a course. And I think sometimes we can overcomplicate the process of creating art because we are trying to have even more bells and whistles than normally we would in our own creative process. And I just want to say that it's more important that you teach something that you know the process backwards and forwards and sideways. And so you want to teach something where you actually have almost muscle memory and a whole lot of practice under your belt, right? And so it's better to stay in a place of authenticity in teaching what you know instead of trying to be someone that you're not. And that actually brings me to tip number 2, which is that oftentimes we discount what we actually know, and it's almost like we have a blind spot to our particular set of skills. And I think that when something comes naturally or easily to us, we just assume that everyone else knows what we know. And I think this is especially true for things that just come organically and come easily to us. So I want you to be careful that you don't make assumptions that people know everything that you know. Most likely, they don't know what you know. And I would actually encourage you to talk to people in your life, even students, customers, anyone who has interacted with your art. And if maybe just ask them a few questions like, what do you think I do really well that maybe I don't know that I do really well? That type of thing, and get some feedback from other people, because I think that you will be surprised at the skill set that you have that maybe not everyone else has. So don't just assume that everyone knows what you know. Tip number 3 is actually kind of going hand in hand with that, in that while you are planning out your content and you're in the process of teaching, it's really important to simplify what it is that you're trying to teach. And what you want to do is you want to make it so that a 5-year-old could understand what it is that you're trying to say. So even though it feels like it might be self-explanatory that everyone should know this, really go back to the basics and the foundation and really try to simplify it and make it as easy as possible. That's going to help you sort of plan out your course in a way that breaks your process and whatever it is that you're teaching down into easy, digestible tools. And I think that, like, I'm even doing that in this course that I'm teaching all of you. I'm thinking through, every tiny little step that I have taken in my creative journey to either plan out a course or B, launch a course. And I'm really thinking about, what is it that I did and how have I built my whole entire system for planning out courses, things that maybe I have done for years that I don't even think about anymore because it's so ingrained into my thinking and into my process. Does that make sense? So you want to simplify as much as possible. And again, don't assume that people know what you know. Tip number 4 is it's important to really go back to the market research step and look at creative ways that you can teach someone what it is that you learned from doing the market research. You always want to have that to kind of fall back on. For example, when I was planning out this course, I asked for feedback from my students and I said, what is it that you really want to learn about courses? What is teaching or what is holding you back from teaching an online course? I asked that to several strategic people, and the feedback that I got, I'm now using to plan out my whole entire course. Does that make sense? You can ask a poll. So let's say that you're going to teach a course on oil painting. You could have a survey that you send out to your students. You could ask in stories on Instagram. You could have a poll on your feed on Instagram. You could ask on YouTube for feedback. Really, the important thing is to really get, the right kind of feedback to help you plan your course. So, for example, if I was going to teach an oil painting course, I could ask my students and my audience, what has kept you from trying oil paints? Okay, and so let's say that the majority of people said that it's too messy, or I don't feel confident in knowing how to use it, or I'm nervous about the fact that it takes too long to dry. And so then I would go and I would plan the content of my course based on the response from my audience. That is really one of the best ways to plan out your courses. Tip number 5 is that, and this kind of goes more into the actual taping and creation of your online course and while you're videotaping. And it's important to kind of think about it before you even start planning out your course, and that is to really talk about your thought process behind your pieces. And so let's say that every time you sit down to paint, you really plan out your composition first by drawing out the lines of a landscape. And you are making sure that the horizon level follows the rule of thirds. And you are, that part of planning is really important to the type of art that you're making. So when you are planning your course, you're going to want to address composition and planning, or, anything that has to do with your specific process needs to be part of planning out the different modules in your course. Okay, so I wanted to mention that. Moving along here, I think sometimes we think we have to have some, amazing plan for a course. But for me, some of my most popular courses have been where I have just done process videos, start to finish paintings, and all I do is I videotape the process of me creating some paintings, and I make each one maybe just a little bit different than the last one, and I just talk them through what I'm doing. And it really can be that simple. So if you have a particular style or a particular process that you like to create in, then you would just plan out 4 or 5 different pieces. You could do 2 or 3 if it's a longer process or you wanted to make it a smaller course. And that could be your whole entire course. It doesn't have to be complicated. You can keep it simple. That was tip number 6. And now I want to talk about tip number 7, which is utilizing any kind of AI tool / chat GPT to help you plan out your course. So, things like coming up with an outline for your course is really important. I almost always start with an outline to my course. So I think about, what is the objective of the course? And I think this goes back to my days of planning lesson plans for kindergartners, right? You should always have an objective, and that should be like tip number 8 or something along those lines. But you should always have almost like an end goal, right? What are students going to get out of this course? They are going to learn how to paint my signature crazy floral bouquet mini paintings, okay? And be able to create 2 on their own, or whatever it is that is the objective for the course. And so really kind of start hashing out what is the transformation, what is the objective of your course, and what materials are you going to use. Really think through all of the different parts of your course, and then help ChatGPT or even AI tools to help you create an outline and help you write lesson plans for each one of those sections, right? The exciting thing is that you can make your courses more dynamic with the use of ChatGPT and AI tools. I haven't used it yet, but Teachable does have, whenever you are planning out your courses in the beginning stages, it asks you, do you want to use the AI tool to help you like basically generate your course? And I have never used it yet, but I think it's a great way to save yourself some time, especially in the planning phases. So tip number 8 is for you while you're planning out your course, you want to kind of think through also what are some of the most common mistakes that students are going to run into, either obstacles with using a certain material or supply, maybe they're going to hit a wall in some part of the process. How can you, as an instructor and a teacher, talk them through those obstacles and roadblocks? And so it's important to kind of think through that. And what I like to do is I like to actually reflect back on things that I have struggled with and or common struggles of my students, okay? And so, especially if when I was first learning something, if I ran into a problem either with composition or with using a specific material or supply, what were some of the problems that I encountered and how did I overcome them? And that is really important for you to address while you're planning your course and as you are teaching, right? And I find that I'm always kind of talking about that throughout my teaching process. So really think through some of those things and make sure that you're including, common problems in your outline for your course, or make sure that you address it while you are in the process of making your videos. Tip number 9 is to really do your best to highlight your own specific skill set and really utilize them to the best of your ability. So if you are, really good at blending or mixing colors, if you're really good at creating a balanced color palette and everyone is drawn to your color palette, if you're really good at achieving dark to light and you're really good at value sense, right? That could be potentially something that you make sure you point out as maybe one of your modules, or you're talking about it when you are promoting your course. And I think even if you wanted to get really specific on the elements of art that you will be covering in your course, so are you going to be specifically talking about line, shape, color, form, value, space, or texture, okay? And really get specific on which elements of art you will be covering in your course. And also make sure that you're creating a course that comes out of what you are actually good at. Unless, of course, the whole point of the course is to show people that you are learning a process and you're sort of taking them along with you. I think that actually might be a really funny idea for a course, and just keep it completely real. I always like to, anytime I'm doing like process videos, if it turns out that I don't like the painting and I'm struggling through the process of making a video, I am just transparent. And I think that's why people have been attracted to me as a teacher, because I am authentic and I don't try to be someone that I'm not. And I think it dispels all of these ideas that our paintings have to be perfect in the end. To talk about your struggles in creating something will then invite your students to not feel like they have to be perfect or precious with their art. So I think that's important. Utilize your skills, but also be realistic and share what your struggles are in the midst of creating. So tip number 10 really speaks to the experience level of your student. And when you're planning out your course, you really need to think through, who is this course for? And, we've already talked a little bit about that in the foundation section of this class, but it's really important to get even more dialed in and more specific for each specific course. Okay, so if you are creating a course that is strictly for beginners, then you need to talk about that, right? But really having an idea of what experience level does the student need to have, and then just be really clear about that up front before you advertise or write your sales page or any of those things. And personally, I like to have a range of experience levels. I have learned while I'm teaching how to modify my lessons, in that I try to make it as simple as possible so that a beginner can follow the directions, but then have a little bit deeper of knowledge so that people who maybe are a little bit more experienced can also learn something from it. And so I think that is important to sort of keep in mind while you're planning. What you're planning for, a beginner watercolor is going to be different than, advanced oil painter or whatever it is that you're teaching. So really get specific in the planning of your course. Tip number 11, I think, is probably one of the things that I have learned how to do really well in planning my courses, and that is to think outside of the box. Some of my most popular courses are when I am utilizing materials or supplies or even substrates in a way that is unexpected and out of the box. I have a garden box class where I actually do paint on an actual box that I make into almost like a canvas piece that you can hang on your wall, and you're painting on the back side of the box, right? And that was a really great hit. And I'm trying to think, my framed class where I teach students how to incorporate the frame into their art, using materials and supplies in an unexpected way. My course, Oil and Water, where I use watercolors with oil paints, completely outside of what most people would think about using, right? And so I encourage you, while you're planning, to sort of think outside of the box, even in the way that you present the material, in the bonuses that you're going to have. Try to think about ways to be creative about the way that your course is set up. Tip number 12 is, I think, fairly self-explanatory, but I just want to mention it. I think it's important that you choose your mediums and your supplies carefully. And so, for example, and this is just really, I don't know, fairly self-explanatory, but if I was going to teach a course for beginners, who have never picked up a paintbrush before, I'm probably not going to get out the oil paint, or, really thinking about the objective of your course and then match your materials and supplies to that objective. So, for example, certain mediums lend themselves to, messy play more than others. And also, some materials and supplies are easier to achieve a certain look than other supplies. Like, you're not going to use high flow acrylics with a palette knife. Well, maybe you might. That would be interesting. But my point is that you really want to think through what materials and supplies are you going to use, and really simplify as much as possible. I find that the shorter the material and supply list, the better people have a response. And oftentimes, this is what I have found. People will look at the supply list and they will decide whether or not they take the course based on your supply list. I can guarantee you will have that. There will also be some students who want to know the exact color that you purchased, the exact size, brand, everything. So be prepared for that level of accountability, or just tell them that that's not how you operate as an instructor. I find that when I'm writing my supply list, that I like to leave it fairly open-ended. I think because I am so much more of a go with the flow type of artist when it comes to teaching, I would rather have students choose a material and supply that they already have sitting around on hand to use in the class that I'm teaching, rather than making sure they buy all new supplies. So I always make this little note of, use what you have. Don't sweat if you don't have every single material and supply. I talk about, even in my supply videos, what is non-negotiable in the supply list, what is important for them to have. A lot of times things like substrates, like it doesn't always matter if they're working on a wood panel or a canvas, a stretch canvas or a canvas board, or even a piece of paper. Sometimes the substrates don't matter as much as the exploration. And also, I like making courses where it is more of an informal type of play, like my course Sketches on Scraps, where I just explain, hey, we're going to just be sketching with whatever drawing materials we have, and I encourage you to use whatever scraps of paper you have sitting around, right? The feeling for that course is going to be very different than my crazy floral bouquet course, where I have a very detailed list of all of my favorite Charvin colors in my favorite oil paint brands, and we need to be working on cradled artboards to achieve the piece that I'm going to show them how to make. That is a much more tighter supply list as opposed to my sketches on scraps where I'm just like, hey, you could do this course with crayons and a Bic pen if you wanted to, right? And so really thinking through sort of the feeling of the course is also important. Okay, and then I think I added this one on last, but when I was talking about the process for just recording your start to finish process videos of your pieces, you know, I find that if I'm going to have a step-by-step process type of course, it is important to kind of vary and mix up your compositions and mix up even maybe your materials and supplies. So sometimes I will do one, let's say I was doing a landscape course. I might do one piece that starts with line work and finishes with watercolors. And then the next piece might be similar, but then I'll add acrylic paint on top of it. And, you know, like whatever it is, or I might change the size of the piece that I'm working on. So one could be small, and then I could take that smaller piece and then make a really big piece that is similar with all of the same kind of techniques. I could have a more abstracted painting as opposed to a more realistic one. Does that make sense? So it's important to sort of vary your process and show people different variations to keep them interested, and so that it's not like you're just doing the same piece 5 times, right? And I like to think about it in terms of giving people the permission that they need to find their favorite way of creating something. And so that's kind of why I like to approach it from different angles, right? So, you know, when I taught my portrait course, I did like a pencil drawing on paper, and then I did an oil painting, and then I did an acrylic painting, and I can't remember what else I did, but my point is that I think it's important to, you know, approach your pieces from different angles and show people different variations of the same type of thing. So that was tip number 13. I think I forgot to mention what tip number it was. And yeah,